Hi everyone. Today's video will be slightly different. Rather than going through the content of a specific chapter, we'll be looking at a particular concept, or in fact concepts, okay? And in doing so, this will help us to make sense of what's been taught in the different chapters. In fact, what we're learning about today will span all the way from the rise of Hitler, which means from the 1920s, all the way until the end of World War II, which means up to 1945, and in fact stretches beyond that, but then that's for another video. Okay, so by looking at this concept, which is basically the concept of ideological enemies, okay, this will help us to understand what was it that happened throughout the course of the chapters which we are studying, also how did it happen, as well as why did it happen. Okay, so maybe let me start by just explaining very briefly what is an ideology. Okay, I won't be going through the details of how exactly these ideologies are different, okay, but we'll just talk a bit about them in general. Okay, so an ideology basically is a set of ideas on how to govern a country or how to run a country. Alright, and the thing is that when different countries or even different parties within a country or different groups within the country have different ideologies, there is a potential for conflict to occur, okay, and the potential for enemies to come about. Okay, so what are the ideologies we'll be looking at today? Basically, there are three. Firstly, there's the ideology of democracy, which is linked to capitalism. Okay, I know it's a bit confusing now, okay, but just take it that the two go together, okay, democracy and capitalism. Another ideology is that of communism, okay, something which you're very familiar with, particularly when you talk about Stalin and the Soviet Union. And finally, we have the ideology of fascism, which in one form, Nazism, which is the form of fascism which we learn about in Germany. It came to be very prominent and led all the way to World War II breaking out. Okay, so these are the three ideologies we'll be looking at today, and how, as the countries which, or the parties which adopted them were enemies to each other, how did this shape events in history, excuse me, all the way from the rise of Hitler until through the 1930s, until causing World War II, and finally the end of World War II, and how does this idea of these ideological enemies all come into play there. Okay, now enough about me talking. Let's get to some real stuff. Okay, so moving on, we first have an understanding of this ideological enemies thingy when we look at the Weimar government's weaknesses. Okay, if you recall, the Weimar government was the democratically elected government, which means from here. Okay, and we learned about how it was very weak and had certain problems, which eventually allowed Hitler to rise to power in place of the Weimar government. Okay, and so the specific weakness we're looking at here, which you should have learnt about and you should remember, is that of the opposition from the left and the right. So how exactly did this work out in this case? Okay, now basically, again, as what I said, the Weimar government in Germany, this was from the late 1910s onwards, from 1918, 1919, all the way until 1933. It was generally associated with democracy and capitalism, okay, this ideology. However, as you would remember, there were rivals to it. From the left, there were the Spartacists, okay, one of the groups from the left. So the left is generally associated with communism, and the particular party which we learned about when we talk about opposition from the left and the right were the Spartacists. Okay, if you don't remember the name, well, try to remember the name, okay? On the other hand, we have the fascists, and in this case, when we talk about this topic, we learn about the Freikorps or Free Corps. Okay, so basically there were these two groups on the left, the Spartacists, and the right, the Freikorps, who basically were rivals to replace the Weimar government. So of course we know that the Weimar government was unpopular, and there was a lot of opposition to the Weimar government, but this opposition was divided among themselves in terms of who would be the one to take over, because the communists on the left wanted to take over, the fascists on the right wanted to take over, and then they were rivals for power. One, for example, if you recall, the Spartacists tried to overthrow the government, but then the Freikorps came in to help the Weimar government stop the Spartacists from taking over. So basically they stopped each other. They were rivals to replace the Weimar government. So, well, good news for the Weimar government was, in the end, the left and the right were not successful in overthrowing the government by use of force. Okay, even though, yes, this was something which they wanted to do, the arrows represent the opposition. They both tried to overthrow the Weimar government and failed. Okay, however, what's the result for the Weimar government? This weakened the Weimar government because now it was not able anymore to focus on solving Germany's problems, right? Why? Because the focus was on trying to prevent the left and the right from taking over from the Weimar government. So their focus was divided. I don't know how you are with multitasking, but I am not very good. And so if I have to do something at one point in time, and I'm supposed to do something, but at the same time I have to deal with people who are disturbing me, such as the left and the right, I won't do my job as well. And that was the problem which the Weimar government had. Because of these ideological differences, the left and the right were not happy with how the Weimar government was running the country. Okay, so this was bad because, again, like I said, Weimar government couldn't focus on solving Germany's problems, and added to that, the impression which people had of the Weimar government was of one which was really weak and basically, for lack of a better expression, cannot make it. Okay, so that's for opposition from the left and the right. Moving on, okay, specifically for Hitler's own actions which led to his rise to power, we learned a bit about how he exploited the fear of communism. Okay, so again, we remember that the Weimar government was basically under this ideology. Hitler's party, the Nazi party, we basically associated with fascism. Remember earlier on we talked about the Freikorps, okay, but now we're looking at the Nazi party, okay, also another group on the right, and on the left we had the Communist Party, okay. So at this point in time, Hitler, he was as he got more powerful, okay, but he got more popular, okay. You see here that Weimar government was the government in power, and he, just like early on we talked about opposition from the left and the right, now the Nazi party and the Communist Party were rivals to take over from the Weimar government, okay, as you can see there. Now, Hitler's aim, of course, was to get rid of the Communist Party, so that obviously if the Weimar government goes, okay, as well, alright, then and he restricted the support for the Communist Party, which were the main rival to replace the Weimar government, and then he could gain support from them. That means people who support the communists instead would support Hitler instead. This would lead to the Nazis' rise to power as the Weimar government disappears, and then Hitler would be the one to take over. So how did this happen? Okay, if you recall, Hitler exploited fear of communism. He told people about how, for example, the farmers, they will lose their land, the business owners, they lose their businesses, and so as a result, people were so worried. Of course, they didn't like the Weimar government to begin with. Now, with all these exploitations of their fears of communism, they would not support the communists as well. So who was left? Of course, we have the Nazis. So this helped the Nazis and Hitler to build up support. Alright, and in the end, due again to these ideological differences, we can see how this helped Hitler rise to power. Alright, okay, so that's pretty much it for chapter 3 in terms of the rise of Hitler part. Okay, now let's look at the next chapter, chapter 4, which is the reasons for the outbreak of World War II in Europe. Okay, and the first reason, main reason we're going to look at is appeasement, and in this case, the reasons for appeasement. Alright, so early on we looked at Germany as one country and the different groups, the different ideological groups within the country. Okay, now we're looking at different countries themselves and how they subscribed or they followed different ideologies. Okay, so do remember Britain and France, they followed this ideology of democracy and capitalism. After Hitler rose to power, okay, there were the Nazis. Alright, so Nazi Germany, this is their flag there, under the fascists. And look at this. This arrow represents the feelings which Britain and France had towards Nazi Germany. And so as you can see here, well, they weren't exactly very happy with the Nazis, right? They were ideologically very different. They disagreed on a lot of things. And so Britain and France were a bit suspicious of Nazi Germany once Hitler took over, especially since Nazi Germany was getting stronger and more powerful. You would have recalled Hitler's aggressive actions, right? And how he was slowly and steadily violating terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So they felt this way about Hitler and the Nazis. Alright, however, if you thought that was bad, okay, the communists in the Soviet Union, if they felt bad about the Nazis, they felt even worse about the communists. Okay, So basically, in that case, how would you say this? Basically, the communists were even more hated than the Nazis were by Britain and France. So what does this mean? Okay, since they were more fearful and suspicious of the communists than of the Nazis, all right, this would mean that the British and French, okay, they felt more favored towards the Nazis than the communists simply because they hated the communists more. All right, what does this mean? Okay, Britain and France would have seen Germany as a potential ally against communism. Okay, so in other words, Britain and France wanted to work together with Germany, okay, because they were approved as compared to the communists in order to deal with communism, okay, and this was why they brought in the policy of appeasement, whereby they gave in to the aggressive demands of Nazi Germany, just so that Nazi Germany would remain satisfied, and therefore, if they are satisfied, then they may be willing to cooperate with Britain and France to deal with communism and prevent communism from spreading any further. Okay, so I hope you can understand how these ideological differences came into play here. Okay, and this would have an implication for further events we learn about in this chapter. Okay, one of these events, okay, is the Spanish Civil War. Now, the Spanish Civil War, not in itself is important, but rather the involvement of a particular person, okay, but let me just, involvement of a particular person in the Spanish Civil War is what is important, and we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, let me just tell you a little bit about the Spanish Civil War. Of course, you know, a civil war means a war fought within the country, by people within the country. That means it's not a war between countries, but a war between different people groups within a country. Okay, and so the Spanish Civil War was basically fought between the Spanish Republicans, who generally, you could see here, were identified with communism, and the Spanish nationalists, who identified with fascism. Now, this in itself is not really of much importance to us, okay? Why is it important though? It's not because of Spain, because you don't really need to know a lot about Spain for this topic, but it's more because who else got involved here? Okay, you can guess. The Nazis got involved. Okay, basically Hitler wanted, by this time he had rearmed. That means his military was now stronger. Conscription had been reintroduced. He had his Luftwaffe, his air force, as well as tanks and submarines, things he wanted to test. Okay, maybe not the submarines, but basically he wanted to test his military strength. And so one way to do so was to lend support to the Spanish nationalists. Okay, since they shared some ideological belonging. Okay, they did identify with each other because of the ideology. Okay, and so he wanted to send his troops into Spain to help the nationalists. All right, now this would not be accepted because this is basically German aggression, and as you remember already from the Treaty of Versailles, the aim of the British and the French and the Americans was that Germany should remain weak, right, or is not aggressive. But, well, what happened was, okay, what excuse did Germany give? They said, we are helping you to deal with the communists, okay? We are helping you to deal with the communists, okay, in German accent, okay, pardon, it's terrible. But anyway, we are helping you to deal with the communists, all right? And so they use this as an excuse. Why? Because you know that, if you recall from earlier, Britain and France, they hated the communists more than they hated the Nazis, right? So if you use this as an excuse, this made them more favorable towards the Nazi actions. And in fact, yes, as a result of this, the British and the French did not take any action at all against Nazi Germany, even though they should not have gotten involved in the Spanish Civil War by sending their troops down and military to help, right? So, basically this is even a form of appeasement, because Britain and France, they let Germany have its way and didn't do anything to punish Germany. By doing so, this strengthened Hitler's view that the British and French, as well as the League of Nations, of which Britain and France were a part of, were weak. Okay, and this therefore encouraged him to be even more aggressive, which is basically the main theme throughout us learning about Hitler's aggressive actions. We learned that because he took small steps, and Britain and France, the League of Nations, didn't try to stop him, then this made him bolder to take even bigger steps, and bigger and bigger and bigger steps, and he went all the way until the end, when finally World War II broke out, right? So this is one of the parts, and you can see how the ideological differences came into play there. Okay, now moving on, another event which led to the outbreak of war in Europe. Fast forward a bit to the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Now this requires a bit of explanation, so please do bear with me, but it is important that you know this. Alright, so again we have Britain and France, we have the Communist Soviet Union, okay, and we have the Fascist Germany, or Nazi Germany. Now, basically, the communists, they, of course, they hated they hated Britain and France, but in this case, they actually were more wary of Hitler and Nazi Germany. So the Soviets proposed an anti-Nazi alliance between the communists and the British and French to deal with Hitler. All right. Now you can see this cartoon here. This gives you a bit of this depiction of that. Let me try to explain this for you. So as you can see here, I hope you recognize this is the communist symbol, office of Molotov. This is the Soviet foreign minister, so this represents the Soviet Union. This sign here on the door states, engaged on talks on the British-Soviet Pact. In other words, this shows the time when the Soviets and the British, okay, were discussing forming a pact. In other words, like an alliance, okay, it's a team up in order to deal with the Nazis, basically. So they were talking about it, okay. Who is this over here? Who are these people here? Now these people, okay, are the Nazis, and I don't know if you can see very clearly. They were proposing something called the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which means rather than the British and the Soviets forming an alliance, instead the Nazis and the Soviets forming an alliance, okay. And you see this British would agree to this British-Soviet Pact, and of course we know in the end they didn't, so that the Nazis would be able to step in to form a pact with the Soviet Union. Now, why was this important? Okay, we'll get to that in a moment, but I hope you understand how this works out, okay? So moving on. Alright, what was the British and French response to the Soviet proposal? As you can see there, not very positive, okay, because if you remember from earlier, they hated the communists more than they hated the Nazis, and so they did not respond favorably to this. They did not want this, in other words. And so you can see from the cartoon just now, okay, basically the British left and the Nazis went in, and of course we know, well, we'll come to what happened later on. Alright, so, okay, the communists of course were not very happy about that. Okay, why was this? So what did the British and French prefer? They preferred an anti-communist alliance, in other words, to team up not with the Soviet Union but with Nazi Germany, okay, to deal with the communists. So of course the communist Stalin would not be in a very happy mood. Okay, so as you can see here later on, this is a cartoon talking about what happened during the Munich Agreement, okay, which is when the British and Hitler, okay, this is Chamberlain and this is Hitler, came together to discuss the fate of the Sudetenland, which is the piece of land in Czechoslovakia around the border near Germany, the German-speaking area. Okay, and if you recall from what you've learned in chapter 4, we learned that the Soviet Union, which was actually supposed to give protection to Czechoslovakia, which is this country here, should anything happen, they were not even invited to the talks, so they were not aware of what was going on. Okay, so basically this shows that the Soviets, in this case Stalin, please remember Stalin, the guy with the big mustache, okay, the Soviets were kept out of talks. Okay, so this basically shows an instance of the Soviet Union being ignored. Alright, see what, no chair for me, so he's like, saying, oh, you didn't invite me, and that was the case, right? Because again, the British did not care much for the communists, and at least at this point in time, the Nazis didn't really care much for them either. Okay, this is 1938 September. So these people, okay, the discussions at the Munich conference, again we have Hitler, Chamberlain, and then there we have Stalin. Alright, so obviously Stalin would not have been very happy, okay, censored, beep, 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 okay, what Stalin would have said, okay, in response to not being consulted. And so basically, like you saw just now from the emoji, okay, Stalin was really not happy. Here we have Hitler, okay, and he had an idea. What was his idea? Since he saw that the communists were so peeved, so pissed off, okay, at what had happened, okay, he saw the opportunity to form instead a Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. So while there were British and French wanted to make an alliance with Hitler in the end made overtures. In other words, he went to Stalin and said, hey, why don't we form a pact instead, as you can see here from the very blissful marriage, right? Okay, but again it says here, wonder how long the honeymoon will last. In other words, since there are different ideologies, can they really agree? But basically Hitler managed to convince Stalin to form a pact of non-aggression. Okay, the details I'm not going to go through here, but in very quick summary, okay, this made British and French really alarmed because they would not have expected the communists and the Nazis to form a pact because they hated each other, right? So this came as a big shock to Britain and France, right? And this eventually facilitated the German invasion of Poland. Non-aggression because, if you recall, Germany would invade Poland with the consent of the Soviet Union, which promised not to do anything to stop Germany, and in return, in secret, the Soviet Union would be able to get the other half of Poland. Okay, so anyway, to cut long story short, this Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact paved the way for the German invasion of Poland, which again, as you recall, led to Britain and France finally declaring war on Germany after many instances of closing one eye or both eyes to the aggression which Germany had done. Finally, they said, okay, we're going to do something. So this is the something which they did. Okay, and as a result of that, this led to the start of World War II in Europe. Okay, so I hope you can understand and see how this triangle enemies thingy had an impact on starting World War II in Europe. Right, moving on, the next chapter, excuse me, move on to Germany's defeat in World War II. So we fast forward a couple of years, okay, as if you recall from earlier on, we remember how there was a Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. Alright, what happened? Okay, France, within a couple of years, they were basically defeated, alright, and so there was no more French in the picture, which left Britain alone as the as part of the Allies. Okay, the Allies mainly consisted of Britain at this point in time, okay, by 1940 or so. Okay, so the British were left alone to deal with the Nazis in particular. The communists weren't fighting directly against the British, okay, but still they had a pact of non-aggression. So anyway, this left Britain in a very bad position, and Britain came close to defeat, but if you recall, they did not, right? They managed to hold on, partly due to German poor decision making, especially due to Hitler's ideas. But anyway, I'm back to the point here. Alright, this soon was broken. Why? Because just about 2 years after the Nazi-Soviet pact was signed, in fact, sorry, even less than that, okay, what happened was, okay, the Nazis betrayed the communists, they broke the pact, okay, they attacked the Soviet Union as well, and of course, again, you see, Soviet Union was not very happy about that. Alright, at the same time, while they were continuing to deal with Britain, even though by this time they basically did not do so much to Britain. They were more concerned about dealing with the Soviet Union at this point in time after they betrayed the alliance. Okay, let me show you again. So again, this Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, this was soon broken, and instead of being allies, as you can see here, the Nazis turned against the communists. Okay, and the communists weren't very happy. Now, things which made things a bit more interesting. Later on, we learned that the USA was to join the Allies after the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. Alright, and so this meant now that Germany was fighting a war against two strong opponents simultaneously. Okay, Soviet Union, if you remember, after Stalin's industrialization and all that, they went through a lot of problems, but it was a strong opponent. And so now, with USA entering the war, Nazis had to deal with fighting the communists, the Soviet Union on one side, plus especially the USA, but also Britain still was rather strong, okay, and this helped weaken the Germans, which in the end eventually contributed to the defeat because they were fighting on two fronts. On the eastern side with the Soviets, on the western side, but on the other side with the British and the Americans, okay. And so, as they could not concentrate their military efforts, this weakened them, okay, and eventually contributed to their defeat. Now, another reason for Germany's defeat was Soviet resistance, which is linked to what we've just covered, but we just look at it from a slightly different angle. Okay, so if you recall, after the communists were very unceremoniously dumped by the Germans, they of course joined the Allies, right? Again, this is before Americans joined. So the Soviet Union joined the Allies in around 1941 June. Okay. Later on, of course, the Americans joined in December after the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. Alright, and now that there is this alliance, okay, this is really quite a powerful one. Okay, and eventually, before that, while, okay, this arrow represents who was the aggressor. Well, initially, it was the Germans which were the aggressors, especially now when the Soviet Union joined in after they had overcome the shock of being being surprised by Germany in the invasion, and also after the Americans joined in, which were very strong. Soon the tide turned, and rather than British, USA, and the Soviet Union being on the defensive, they now went on the aggressive. Okay, they were now the aggressors, and Germany was now on the defensive. All right, and of course, this is why I said just now, the Allies were now stronger once Soviet Union and the USA joined. Okay, this gave the Allies the advantage, as now they went on the offensive against Germany, and this of course also contributed to Germany's defeat, as Germany was no longer able to deal with the overwhelming power of the Allies, the strengthened Allies, Britain, USA, Soviet Union. Okay, now, so that's about it for the European part. Let me just talk briefly about the impact on Japan. Alright, in Japan, okay, it was in Asia, it's slightly different, because yes, there was the British and the Americans, but in terms of the fascist partner in Asia, it was Japan. Okay, if you may recall, Germany, Japan, and Italy were the Axis powers. Okay, Italy, well, not really much of a power, but well, Japan definitely was a power. Okay, so this was the case in Asia. Alright, so of course we remember, especially once the Japanese dropped the atomic bomb, my mistake, sorry, they attacked Pearl Harbor. Okay, they were on the offensive because, again, the British and the Americans were caught a bit off guard. Okay, so the Japanese were, what I was trying to say, sorry, is that, okay, let me repeat that. Okay, so the Japanese were fighting the Allies, British and the USA. Okay, but now that the USA joined in, once they regrouped, recovered from the shock, they became stronger. Alright, as a result, okay, it soon became the case after a couple of years, okay, whereby it was the Japanese on the defensive. So again, just like earlier on we saw the direction of the arrows, earlier on Japan was on the offensive. Now, as the British, now in particular the Americans, showed how strong they were, now the Americans were on the offensive. Okay, now the Soviet Union was not really in the picture yet at this time. They were fighting more in Europe. Okay, but in any case, they still were allies. Alright, and this strength really helped overwhelm the Japanese eventually. Another thing that happened was, okay, of course we know that the Americans had developed the atomic bomb. Okay, this is one of them there, and we know that eventually, because the Japanese were so stubborn, and they were so stubborn because they felt it was a dishonor to surrender. So even though it was so close to them being defeated, they refused to give up and they continued to fight. And so the Americans, because they had the technology, they decided to use the atomic bomb. And so this is what happened. Okay, so the bomb went off, and Americans was saying, hey, so are you impressed by that? Who are they asking that to? They're asking that to the Soviets, because remember, the Soviets, even though they were the allies, they still were ideological enemies. Okay, and so this is basically something which caused the end of the fascists in Asia Pacific. But what was the Soviet response? Okay, that is something which is where we're going to leave off now. That's a cliffhanger which will be carried on very soon in the next video to come really soon. Okay, so I hope you have understood this well enough. If there's any trouble, please don't hesitate to look for Mr. Ong and myself so we can explain this in greater detail to you. Alright, thank you. That's it for today. Good night.